You're all?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Inside Movies Galore. I am your host tonight as we continue with our theme of the month of August in the Asylum. So, today or tonight, we are discussing James Mangold's 1999 classic feature, soon to get a Criterion release. Nope, just kidding.
Maybe.
But Girl
never know.
Interrupted, and it stars Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie and Clea Duvall, among others. Written by Susannah Kaysen, James Mangold, and Lisa Loomer. I think I'll just say what IMDb says about this film, and then we'll go into first impressions. Based on writer Susannah Kaysen's account of her 18-month stay at a mental hospital in the late 1960s. So, going over to... let's go with you, Roger, first.
My first impressions of Her Girl Interrupted.
Was this a first time watch for you?
Absolutely my first time watching it. It'd be like 99% of these movies I've never seen before. But I must admit, I was taken aback a bit. I thought I would absolutely hate it. Just one of those kind of films I've never heard about. I had a lot of apprehension about it again. But it turned out it was a pretty good flick. Whoopi Goldberg did a good job. Winona Ryder. And I was looking at that crazy lady. I said, that looks like Angelina Jolie because of the lips. And it turned out what she was. So, actually, I think it was a pretty good show overall. But it kind of reminded me of One Flight Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Everybody had a different personality and had kind of a day-by-day thing until something happens.
Okay. How about you, Dane? What was this a first-time watch for you?
Yes, it was. This had been on my list for a while. And I had heard very different things about it from the critical community, which I knew was very mixed on it, and yet Angelina Jolie's performance was always seen as a highlight. But then I heard from people just in general out and about in the world, and they seem to like it a lot. I know that the movie has a very strong following with women, and especially with women that have struggled with some kind of mental illness like depression or like I'm thinking of one friend of mine in particular who has been in a mental institution on and off different periods in her life. And I know that it was something that she referred back to. So it definitely speaks to a certain type of person. And obviously it's based on a true story. I have not read the book, but I understand the movie does take some liberties with it, and that the author herself was not terribly happy with it, because I guess that it sort of glosses over some of the nastier aspects of her stay there. And I do think that given when it was made, I do think that if they made this movie nowadays, they probably would have dived into some of the seedier or more unpleasant aspects of women's mental health in the 60s. I mean, not to say that they didn't here, but I do think they might have taken a deeper dive now just because we have more like female-centric stories that wouldn't have otherwise gotten made. Like I'm thinking of Orange is the New Black and stuff like that. But I think it is solid for what it's trying to be. I do think it kind of meanders in the middle. But again, it's based on a true story. It's based on a memoir, so it's not like a novel in the classical sense of like, they're having to structure a real story around, or a narrative around a real story, and real life does tend to meander, and it doesn't really fit into a lot of 3-act structures all that neatly unless you kind of force things. And not to say that this forced it too much, but I do feel like it did meander a bit in the middle, and that it was such that you could make the argument that Winona Ryder is just this, like Whoopi Goldberg says at one point, that she's like this spoiled girl that just needs to get over herself, basically, which I didn't want to take that attitude because I do feel like that's a bit reductive and a bit arguably sexist because of the fact that there are a lot of women out there who do struggle with mental illness of all sorts, and it can come across as though you just need to straighten up and fly right, and then the situation is rarely that simplistic. Um, Granted, she is Winona Ryder, the protagonist. She is probably one of the most normal people there in terms of her behavior, and as I'm sure Brandon will get into when it's time for him, a lot of those people nowadays probably wouldn't be in an institution nowadays. They probably would have to go on and off of various meds nowadays, which is usually what happens. But it's very few of them seemed overly severe to where they would probably be institutionalized nowadays. But yeah, as a movie itself, I think it was solid. I wasn't like gaga for it, but I think that it would definitely appeal to a certain type of person who perhaps has gone through a lot of those same things.
Alrighty. Let's go over to Jake. Was this the first time watch for you?
Oh no, definitely not. This was actually a theme that I'm kind of circling around, trying to figure out a way to play more on. This is the idea of the 99 is sort of like a pivotal year for me and my interest in movies and whatever. It was really the year that I say that I became a film geek. And it was the first year that I really, really, really paid attention to the films that all the critics and award shows were talking about. And so this one would have been on my radar regardless. I think, though, I'm about 95% sure that I didn't even wait for the critical response. I actually saw it in theaters from the get-go. Because I was already familiar with Winona Ryder, and I was intrigued by the basic idea. And I think I was already familiar with Kurtwood Smith from that 70s show, and Whoopi Goldberg, of course. So there was some familiar faces involved. So I know I saw it very early. I can't remember again if it was right away or if it was once it started getting buzz, and it was one that I very quickly developed a fondness for. There are a lot of films from that year that are like nostalgic for me, and this is one of them. It's been a long time since I've seen it. A long time. So much so that I had totally forgotten that Jared Leto and Jeffrey Tambor were in this. And I had... I remembered Clea Duvall and the late Brittany Murphy. But I got a picture here. Elizabeth Moss, actually in a cast of teens, was the only teen of any note. But she, of course, was an unknown at the time. This is the film that, for me, like many other people, put Angelina Jolie on the map. I was kind of smitten with her for a bit after this. Not entirely because of the film itself, but
just wait, and then she does Tomb Raider, and then it's like, oh shit.
Well, I have to admit, when she was announced as Lara Croft, I was like, yeah,
exactly.
Well, that was appropriate.
Yes,
she was most definitely a sex symbol at that time and in the decade to follow.
For a little while, yeah. But overall, this was also quite possibly my first exposure to James Mangold, who, of course, would go on to do such great films as Logan and Ford v Ferrari and any number of things. So there's a lot of people that went on to bigger and better, well, maybe bigger and better things, but definitely, would go on to prominence, that it was fun coming back to it and revisiting it, knowing all this, after so many years. This may have been my fourth or fifth viewing overall, but it's, like I said, the first one in a while. I do like it. It was less depressing than I remembered. It actually is kind of like Cuckoo's Nest. There is some depressingness to it, but there's also a through line of fun at times, which is, at times. And yeah, it's a good one. I'm glad we got a chance to revisit it.
Isn't it interesting with James Mangold?
Right.
So he's had quite the career as a director. He doesn't really have like a distinct style in the way that a lot of classical auteurs seem to have, and yet he does have a lot of frequent collaborators. Like his first work with Hugh Jackman was Kate and Leopold, which I remembered watching as a kid.
That was a good romantic comedy.
I still need to see that.
It's not the best of the Meg Ryan movies from like the 90s and early 2000s, but I remembered watching it, and Hugh Jackman does an incredible job in that. It's kind of a sillier role for him, but he does do a good job with it. But it's just funny, kind of the humble beginnings there, because you would never look at Kate and Leopold and go, from the director of Copland, which is the case, nor would you say from the director of Girl Interrupted, and then you look at like Walk the Line, which he did, and 310 to Yuma, and you'd never say from the director of Kate and Leopold, which is, even though it's true. And then he goes on to do The Wolverine, and then Logan. Logan's arguably, it's one of the best superhero movies ever made, and it's definitely in the top 5. But it's like, it's to such a degree that like those are all so different, but they're. Go ahead.
If I'm remembering correctly, didn't Mangold make history, him and his co-writer, with that one as the first comic book movie to
for adapted
get
screenplay?
it? Yeah, exactly.
Point being that he's had quite the career to where you would never look at like there's definitely a quality to the directing, to the managing of all these different characters and their performances, because it is an ensemble piece, and he's clearly good at handling very different types of personalities and different genres and that kind of stuff. But it's just, you would never look at those and think that they were from the same person, especially because some of his later stuff is very like male centric, whether it's like about a real life guy who's very distinct, aka Johnny Cash, or if it's like 310 to Yuma, which tends to be a guy's genre, or like the superhero genre, etc. But then he's done like Kate and Leopold, which is a romantic comedy, which is tends to be very female centric, and then this is like almost all women, and he handles them really remarkably well. And then before that, he did Copland, and it's like, so he definitely seems to have a good grasp of those kinds of ensemble pieces. And despite if it's mostly guys, mostly women, whatever it is, he seems to understand how to handle them all within the context of genre, whatever the genre is.
Right. And now you do bring up an interesting point, because he's actually apparently filming the next Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
So I'm just absolutely loving the idea now of the marketing department with the movie getting ready to hit theaters, from the guy who brought you Copland.
Leopold.
Well, did you?
Isn't that funny though? The way that certain movies, like, they follow people around and they kind of come to define them, and yet other movies not as much, or other directors not as much. They're able to be more chameleonic.
Right.
I just find that funny.
Right.
Alrighty. Was that your first impression, or did you have any more?
Are you talking? Oh, yeah. I guess I'm mostly done. Oh, one more thing. Again, it's been years since I've seen this, and this may be the first time that I saw it since Brittany Murphy's passing, and especially given my own personal experience with pneumonia. Uh, the idea that someone a famous and well-known and respected actress could die of pneumonia at 32 in this day and age just gives me all the more reason to be very, very, very angry at the hospital that nearly killed me. Um, but going back and watching, given which character she plays in the film, it really added a little bit of poignance to that scene. Yeah.
Alrighty. Heading over to Brandon was this a first time watch for you?
No, definitely not. I have an odd story with this one. So I was fresh into college at the time, around 99. Well, actually, yeah, it would be my freshman year in college. And I was a mutual friend of ours had something really bad happen to her, and she needed to be cheered up. And we were going to take her to see a film. I remember that this group also was a group I saw the House on Haunted Hill remake with, which also was 99, I believe. I want to say that we were going to see Scream 3, but I could be wrong. We were going to see something like that in that vein. And we ended up, and that was sold out at the time. So we were like, well, this looks like it could be interesting. Let's see if this cheers you up. So yeah, probably not the most appropriate cheer you up film. I guess you could put it in the veins like, well, I guess it's not me. But yeah, definitely this was probably the wrong pick, but she seemed to have recovered some after we watched that film. I even have a picture from that night, which was rare to see the person smile. So I'm guessing they enjoyed that film. The film itself was before I really had an interest in. I had a vague interest in doing mental health work at the time, but I wasn't. I was more wanting to work with people with physical disabilities, help people rehabilitate and get back to work after injuries, these types of things. That was my original plan. So it was kind of weird seeing this take, especially with my father's fascination with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I watched it again later when I got the DVD, and then I've watched it. This will probably be my third watch, maybe my fourth, but I think it's just my third. It was really a debatable topic because I had just the night before saw somebody stab themselves in the stomach, and this is something that is not a great follow-up for seeing stuff like that. Most people don't tend to have that as a job hazard, so there were parts that were very uneasy for me this time around, because it kind of recalled a very, very close traumatic events. Still, I do feel like it is a great illustration of borderline personality, and we'll go into their mental health later on. A very good one of major depression and how doctors tended to either misdiagnose or even overdiagnose based on fad diagnoses. Same thing with the types of medications that they utilized back in the day and today. By the way, they do that same stuff today, just at a different level. And of course, and with us watching One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I'm sure we all agree with Whoopi Goldberg saying, "Yes, this is the Hilton comparison." Some of these other
yeah.
I was gonna say, like, and I didn't want to give credence to some of the easy arguments that one could put forth for her Winona Ryder's character, that she's just spoiled and she needs to get over herself, because again, that's a very tempting thing to argue, and I think a lot of critics were essentially arguing that. I didn't want to do that just because, again, I knew that for a lot of women that I've talked to, that they can relate to the story. But I will say that Whoopi Goldberg is right, that just in terms of the way that that specific hospital is run, and relative to like the severity of her condition and relative to the severity of the people around her, that she definitely isn't anywhere near as bad off as a lot of the people there are. And I'm sure that there are higher security places that would have people who are even worse off.
Oh, well, before I go into my first impression, I just want to say what a prophecy that Winona Ryder says in this very beginning, where she says something to the effect, "Have you ever stolen something without paying for it?" And I was like, well, I guess she preluded to her ending up going and shoplifting later on.
Yeah, I guess so.
Actually, this film kind of forewarns a handful of individuals, or at least a couple, because also, Melvin, their shrink, is played by Jeffrey Tambor, who has definitely had some disrepute brought to his name in recent times, and it just seems kind of appropriate with the character that they keep mocking and dumping on, that and who clearly is not the best at his job. There's that one scene that shows him napping while she's talking, that's like, yeah. And I forgot about, when she said that, I thought, isn't that funny? And then I forgot about it. But you mentioned it. Yeah.
Well, you've got a lot of people in this that I just realized. So you have a lot of people in this that have. Well, let's think about it. So Winona Ryder had the shoplifting thing, and she's had some other things where remember that kind of memeable bit at the awards ceremony where she was looking around at stuff that wasn't there, and then people globbed onto that. So there's that. You have Angelina Jolie, who for a while there was doing things like when she was with Billy Bob Thornton, and they had vials of each other's blood and that kind of stuff, and she had that image of being like a bad girl until some years went by. But
she claimed that she played the character by basically playing her straight. She basically was like, I'm the sane one and everyone else is crazy. And that was the way she played the character. And
and that's the way that the character saw herself too. But,
exactly.
Well, but then you got that. You've got Jeffrey Tambor, who I guess was accused of being emotionally abusive or whatever on set, which I don't know how true that is. I'm not saying it's not, but it's at the same time, it's so you've got that. You've got Vanessa Redgrave, who had that infamous Oscar speech. And then you had Brittany Murphy, who died young, and you have I think the one who hasn't had any kind of controversy or weirdness that I can think of, who was pretty well known, is Elizabeth Moss. I hadn't heard of anything with her, and then Jared Leto, not so much not so much personal crises that I can think of, but just people were freaking out about his Joker method acting or whatever. But I guess that those people have never heard of Marlon Brando.
What's
Did
up?
we get to Dave's first impression?
Oh no, not yet.
No.
Sorry.
I
just found that interesting.
I have an interesting history with this film, maybe because it was not the first film I probably would have gone to see, but it was just so happened to be in my sister's VHS collection at the time. And so I ended up watching it, and my God, Brittany Murphy's performance in this film is just eerie.
Mm-hmm.
And it haunted me since then. And I watched it again like some years back. So I would have to say that this was my third time watching the film. And I at the time that I watched this, I was like, holy fuck, Whoopi Goldberg put on some weight for this film, I guess. Because I remember watching her as Guinan in Star Trek Next Generation, and from there to here, she's definitely put some pounds on. So, but Angelina Jolie, she was like the love of my life for quite a while, and I remembered her in the Meatloaf video from Bats Out of Hell. And to me, the first time that I recognized her in anything was Hackers. And this was several years before this film. So to me, that was my girl in my mind at the time. And
so we have
amazing performance in Gaia.
So we have at least 2 cast members who've starred with Meatloaf. That's an interesting thought.
And I just thought this was a film of its time because I guess the first time around and the second time around, I didn't realize that there were other things happening in the film, like the assassination of Martin Luther King. That was happening in the background. There was another thing I think that was going on at the time. Oh, the draft. The draft was happening, and it was an interesting look at what a female would think. As soon as a guy would be drafted, oh, they're dead. So, other than that, I guess let's begin with the plot. So Winona Ryder plays a young woman who, at first, we're led to believe that her parents have forced her into, putting herself away. And the other thing that seems to be going on in the background is the fact that her character has actually had a promiscuous relationship with someone her parents know. The husband of a wife, I think it's like a teacher.
Yeah,
well, she had a relationship. They do make the very salient point in this film where she's like, how would you say that I'm promiscuous? If 5, 10, how many girls would it take for a guy to be promiscuous? That's a very salient point, especially at that time.
Yeah, well, and that's a problem that we still face today, where men are sort of expected to sleep around, but if a woman does it once, then she's branded a slut for the rest of her life, pretty much. And it's like, well, so what, is the guy a player, or is he a man-ho, or what is it? And it just generally the attitude has been, oh, he's a player, he's a stud.
Jared Leto's definitely a man-ho.
Yeah, I think so. But you know what I mean? It's like it's society's choice of labeling people, that way, and so that's I think why a lot of people really, a lot of women really relate to that story, because it is partially because it is a period piece, and a lot of the attitudes that we saw then we still see reverberations of it today, but also because of those questions that get raised. What counts as crazy, what counts as you know as abnormal, and that's something that I think a lot of us can relate to, because you know, within the sphere of abnormality, quote unquote, there can also come great gifts that other people don't have, and great drawbacks. It's not a perfect fit either way.
Oh yeah, and so she ends up signing herself into a psych ward.
And they give the reason for that. I think they show that pretty early. They even showed it before the whole event, where she cuts her wrists, and I think I can't remember what it was with.
Well,
I think it was a razor blade.
Yeah,
Was
because
Susannah?
the doctor goes in afterwards with because the doctor is talking to her afterwards, and she's just basically saying, I didn't try to kill myself, which, by the way, I can tell you I've heard that a lot of times. And no, she was trying to kill herself.
Well,
And
it
you
wasn't
figure that later,
specifically the cutting. They said she chased a bottle of aspirin with a bottle of vodka.
Yes, she did that as well. Yes, on top of it, which of course. So yes, she was trying to die. Yeah, I had a headache.
Yeah. You will have a headache if you survive
that. So yeah, she ended up signing herself in, which is, again, that's very different from how they do it these days, because these days it's not a sign yourself in and you can only leave when they want you to leave. It can be close to that nowadays, because if you're going in, it's like
it depends upon the risk.
Yeah, I mean, if she were to say sign herself in and then say, I'm going to sign myself out, I'm going to go kill myself, they wouldn't let her leave these days. But, I mean, if she was doing okay and she hadn't made any gestures for a while, they wouldn't be able to keep her from leaving. If she signed herself
that ended up being one of her problems during her stay there, because if she signed herself in, then why shouldn't she be able to sign herself out?
But that's how it was those days. It was very different. There wasn't as much autonomy.
Once you signed yourself in, you committed yourself to the treatment.
Yeah, you were at the mercy of the doctors, and back in those days, there was no deinstitutionalization. This is prior to that. The doctors could bill eternally and just constantly make money
and keep you there forever.
Yeah, sometimes 20, 30 years. Lifers were not uncommon in these types of settings for doing these exact same. Voluntary people could be there for lifetimes. And that's a scary thing. But yes, the way that she came across, I can guarantee you, even at this point, she wouldn't have gone voluntarily. There would have been no voluntary. She would have been forced into the hospital. If I had that case and it came to me, there's no talking about voluntary at that point. There's too much, what do they call it? Too much impulsivity. And when you've got somebody who's impulsive like that, there's no telling that they might try it again. Especially if you've been seeing her, or you know the case and you know the fascination with death, it's always that possibility of it coming back.
So what do we think about Susannah as a character throughout the film?
Narrator.
Well, it's interesting with her because she, again, every time I think of this film, even before having seen it, just kind of the general premise of it, I think of my one friend who's a big fan of Sylvia Plath, and that seems to be an author that girls that struggle with mental illness, or ones that have possibly had suicidal ideation or whatever, that they kind of gravitate to. And I guess that Sylvia Plath herself actually did successfully commit suicide. But it's like, I do what the film, what it did was it did kind of put me in the headspace of the friend that I'm thinking of a little bit better, which is a good thing in and of itself. I do think that it's not to downplay her struggles, because I think they are legitimate struggles, but they are obviously able to be overcome, and that's part of what the story is about, is her realizing that her struggles are legitimate, they are not insurmountable. And so on the one hand, a person could say, a less empathetic person could say, just get over yourself. But then, someone that's really going through her feelings would be like, yes, I know exactly what she's going through. And I'm somewhat in the middle, because I personally haven't. I mean, I've been in my dark places, but they haven't been for those reasons. And and her reasons are definitely not the reasons I would have for being in that situation, but I've known people like that, so it's like I think of them. So I'm somewhat in the middle on that, but I think that as a character, and as a portrayal, I think Winona Ryder seems to get that person pretty well, to make her sympathetic. Now, I know that her performance was, for whatever reason, the critics seem to really fixate on it as a negative, and I don't really know why. Because I've generally liked Winona Ryder quite a lot. I think she's done better work. Like, I think her work in Stranger Things was incredible. But I think as far as doing what this type of movie required her to do, she has to be the one who is comparatively normal but struggling and still sympathetic. So she's the eyes through which we see the other characters, so she has to do all that. And she has to be different enough from Angelina Jolie, who is just going for it, and yet thinks that she's the sane one. But she's going for it fully, and she's uninhibited, so you have to have someone to juxtapose against that.
Right. And I think that overall, I personally thought Ryder. Yeah, I think I've seen her do better work. I've seen her do worse. I think she had a couple scenes that she stretched a bit, but otherwise she was quite good. Susannah overall, I do agree. It's kind of she works really well as a foil for the other characters. But that could be a bad thing, considering that it's her story. She luckily has a little bit of depth. She's not just a foil, but she almost works as well or better as a foil to the other characters. Basically, yeah, I do think. I do think one of the criticisms this got was that some of the other characters, when they were not on screen, it was just less exciting. But yeah, there's some truth to that, but I don't fully agree.
I don't fully agree. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I don't fully agree with that sentiment as far as Winona Ryder's acting capabilities. I guess the only thing that I didn't like about Winona Ryder was that she sported that Peter Pan butch hair, and I'm not a fan of short hair on females.
I'm not either, but she also wasn't really sexualized in this, and she wasn't really, portrayed that way.
I don't necessarily feel like any female acting job relies on the sex appeal at all necessarily, unless the part calls for it.
Right.
I mean, Angelina Jolie. It's also a contrast too, because Angelina Jolie, she does have the long hair. She does have the
and her hair seemed to be similar. Jolie's hair seemed similar to that which she had in Gone in 60 Seconds. Just
a
little bit
next year.
But
the portrayal of Winona Ryder It depends on what she was going for. If
Mhm.
she was going for a full-on portrayal of borderline personality disorder, no, she did an abysmal job. But that would not be on her. That'd be on the writer, in my opinion. As far as major depressive disorder, yes, I think she's perfect in that. Now, Angelina
Yeah, but
Jolie, I do think it's a straight role, but that's because I think that I consider Angelina Jolie a borderline personality.
well, that's. I was gonna say I felt like they got the diagnoses a bit mixed up, which I'm sure was partially because of the period. But it's like, yeah, I looked at Winona Ryder and I was like, yeah, this is someone who's clearly just, well,
Mhm.
probably has major depression. On top of just being a kind of mixed up high school graduate during a very mixed up time in history, which that can't be discounted either. But
Yeah.
for sure, major depression. But then it's like Angelina Jolie, she's much more overtly out of control, and like I might have again, Brandon, I trust your judgment a whole lot more on this than mine. But like I looked at her and I was like, I could have bought possibly bipolar disorder, like really severe bipolar, or like yeah. I looked up what everyone was supposed to be, and hers was like sociopathy. Apparently,
See, I
I
don't
could buy
consider
that
her a
too.
Right.
sociopath because there's too much emotion involved. And
Yeah.
with
Mhm.
sociopath, usually it's only one emotion, if that at all, and a lot of it's more faked. It's a much more close to the borderline personality. It could be
Mhm.
bipolar, but the mood swings are much more frequent. They're much
Mhm.
more violent mood swings, and you can see it as it goes. But you notice in the charts when they do the chart reading scene,
Mhm.
how almost every chart, when you look at it, I paused it just because I'm used to reading medical charts, and I'm looking at it, it's like, okay, so they've got the exact same diagnosis and they've got the exact same symptoms, and it looks like they just photocopied it for each person as they
Right.
go. And but that's how they do it. It's called fad diagnostics, and
And
they'll learn about a diagnosis and they'll just give it to everybody.
and then they have that further scene where Kaysen goes over to the bookshelf, gets the textbook out, and looks it up, and she reads off the textbook definition, and she's just like, "Well, that's
Mhm.
me." And then Jolie and Lisa's something like, "Well, that's everybody." And yeah, the way it was defined in the book, I was like, "Yeah, that's adolescence there. That's not a medical disorder the way it was written in the book."
Well,
It
and
was
that's
Well,
like,
that's why
yeah.
again to a certain extent it's like I do think that it's not to discount her experience because I mean people who are
Right.
mixed up or they feel that way, people that feel those kinds of confused feelings generally speaking don't go so far as like attempt suicide.
Hmm.
That does take an extra level of something else to push you that much
mhm.
further. So
Right.
therefore, it would be blasé to say that it was all just, her being a mixed up teenager or whatever. Um, because they're a whole statistically that's just not true that most mixed up teenagers aren't gonna do that. But for sure I do think that what she was being diagnosed
Mm.
with is probably not commensurate with her actual behavior and her actual
Hmm.
output. And that's, of course, the character as presented in the film versus the actual person. Because I'm sure that there's, noticeable differences between the two. And I haven't
Hmm.
seen tapes of the real person side by side. So I don't know,
Yeah.
what the differences are because I know that, if you look at people with X, Y, and Z disorder in those kinds of clinical settings and you look at the video evidence and stuff, the people who are trained to look at the signs, they usually might be able to tell more readily what they have. Um, and so I don't know how pronounced it is with the real person because maybe the real
Yeah.
person does have borderline personality disorder, and maybe it's more pronounced in real life, or maybe that was a full blown misdiagnosis.
It's
Um,
hard to say in the 60s because keep in mind the
Right.
diagnosis was originally made up, in order to basically say, well, if a woman doesn't basically live her life to serve her man,
Right.
she's got this borderline personality disorder. So
Well,
you
yeah.
gotta keep that in mind as well.
If you weren't home with the husband and making sure that you had children and food on the table, then you were obviously psycho.
It means something different today, however.
I do love that our protagonist, our heroine, that she that she does have, in all fairness, so she does have extreme emotional reactions to things, which again, that's not strictly a function of borderline personality disorder itself. I mean, it's a part of it, but it's a part of a lot of different, mental health disorders. But I love the fact that our protagonist in this goes like really, really racist against Whoopi Goldberg. Now, granted, she apologizes later, but it was just like, damn, she really goes for the throat there, and it's like, to the point where it's like, if you tried to do that in a movie nowadays, even in the context of a period piece, it's like, I don't know if the audience would have much sympathy for her left, even with the apology having been achieved. Now, granted, give Whoopi Goldberg a lot of her performance and her character both. Give them credit for immense patience and rationality in the face of someone that's just flying off the handle. But it's just like, that kind of surprised me, because I was like, okay, the saying that has become a meme now is, well, that escalated quickly, and it's like, damn, you really just went for the throat when you did not need to at all.
Well, I know the character of Susannah. She wasn't exact. She was an only child, and she didn't seem to have very many friends at the school that she was at. So, so when she came to have this hospital stay, these were her first friends that she ever actually really had. So,
she had guy friends, but different.
Yeah, guy friends,
and that clearly means that she's promiscuous, because a girl having guy friends mostly, unthinkable. Just like a guy, if he has mostly female friends, he must be gay, surely.
Well, in any case, Susannah is shown on a tour of the place and by Whoopi Goldberg, and she ends up meeting Lisa. And Lisa is very obtuse and obstinate towards her, because she is now roommates to what was her name? Georgina. And
it was Jamie, I think, was the previous roommate.
Yeah, and Jamie was apparently Lisa's best friend or something like that, and I guess something happened to her. And
I wanted to know more about Georgina.
Yeah, I really liked her, and like at this time when this film came out, Clea Duvall was one of those like indie darlings who was in all the little left to the middle films, and she's done a few things since then. But I really liked her in the role.
I started paying attention to her in The Faculty. So, but seeing her here and having seeing her that she's reading The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the series, and then having that story of the Wizard of Oz kind of somewhat play throughout this this entirety. The girls don't really like get along per se until they actually gather together at night and go down into the basement, and evidently there's an old abandoned bowling alley.
I love that little bowling thing they've got there.
I love it too.
Well, before we get too far away from that, considering that my brain has been firmly planted in the land of Oz for a couple months now for research for my series Oztober, the fact that popped up and it was the Oz books in addition to the 1939 film, I was like, that my my antenna perked up when I saw that, and I was like, it's never gonna leave me, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny when you think of all the different things that are on film. You never know what's gonna mention Oz, or there's no place like home, or something to that effect. There's always someone who ends up saying something somewhere along the way.
Well, and let's think of just briefly. Let's think about the symbolism of the two. What are the two moments where the Oz stories, more broadly, where they feature into this story? So the first scene towards the beginning, the one girl is reading the actual Oz books, the L. Frank Baum books, and the one that she's reading
Is the
is the
Patchwork.
Patchwork Girl of Oz. Yes, so that's a girl that's assembled, much like these girls are sort of patched together mentally, in one way or another, or at least attempting to be. And, it's all in service of trying to emulate what a proper girl is like, which metaphorically that definitely works. And then, of course, towards the end, we have what did you learn, Dorothy? That whole scene from the 39 film. And what's funny about that scene is that, if you tried to write a movie scene in the third act, if you tried to write it that way nowadays, it would come off as so painfully on the nose that people would be like, rewrite this, except that was groundbreaking in 1939. And it is one of the best kind of summing up of what the hero has learned throughout her journey moments in cinema, like a very explicit hero's journey. And it's just funny to see that juxtaposed with the journey that our heroes go through here, and some of the similarities, some of the differences. There are parallels, but it's not stated anywhere near as explicitly as it is there. So it's almost like this movie is having to it's kind of allowing the other movie to kind of make its points for it a little bit by having that thematic tie. But I find it interesting that it's the difference between how explicit you could get, because it hadn't been done quite that way before in 1939 versus nowadays, where you'd have to say it without having to spell it out quite so explicitly. But they're able to do it through reference rather than through having to, be quite so overt themselves. But still, it's just an interesting. The Oz stories and the way that they factor into this definitely stuck out to me relative to all the research that I've been doing.
But what did we think about the character of Daisy?
Well,
she's interesting.
She has that live-in kitchen, chicken, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought she was an interesting character at first because she was one of the girls that like no one she allowed no one in her room or whatever, and finally it was because she wanted Valium. It is why Winona Ryder ended up being able to go into her room, and I guess this is kind of like the first antagonistic moment that Lisa has with Daisy.
She was abusing laxatives, but of course a lot of that could also be because it was it could probably because of her terrible diet.
Yeah, probably blocked her up pretty good. Which that was going to be my question, because again, Brandon, you would know this more than me. But like a lot of the medications that they were swapping around back and forth, or they were trading for this or that, it's just I do often wonder. So like, let's say laxatives, you could probably take more of those than were recommended if you were really backed up. But like, I don't know what like is there some kind of like high that you could get from those if you like ground them up and smoked them, or what would it be? Same with some of the other stuff they were trading for.
the Valium was the most valuable thing, obviously, but the laxatives. See, when I look at that, I think eating disorder because, and which would actually fit with what she was looking at, because a lot of times individuals will overdo laxatives, especially with eating disorders, to try and. It's another way of purging through bulimia, other than throwing it up. It's the other way.
Right.
And my thoughts were that she was abusing them to the point where, of course, they weren't giving them to her. But of course, it also could be the fact she's eating all these chickens. But it's also she could be binge eating. Another reason why she wouldn't want to eat with them in the cafeteria, because again, it's eating in front of people is disgusting to her.
Yeah,
Right.
which I mean that could be a whole that whole character's psychology. I am sure in the book or in something similar that you could probably go much more into depth with the way that person's mind functions. And I would have to ask the person I'm thinking of, but I'd have to ask her if she's known people like the other characters in that particular ward, because I know that they all kind of have their own particularities, shall we say, and it would just be interesting to kind of have you run into an actual person that's like that, to kind of get a better window into their mindset. But
I feel
I
for
found
Daisy of all of them. I feel for her almost most of all, because she really is. She comes off as really kind of abrasive,
Innocent.
but she is but she's the one who's probably the biggest victim of all.
Well, yeah, because her father is obviously having a relationship with her.
Yeah.
And everyone kind of knows it, and it all comes out.
In a big way.
Oh, yeah. And, yeah, I mean, I feel for Daisy the most.
To quote Curly Howard, I'm a victim of circumstance, and it does seem like she is the most of all of them.
Another thing about her I just want to throw out, I was going to maybe say something earlier, but the flow was going along a little fast. But I think, Dave, you were the one that brought up the appearance of the girls, and you're talking about Jolie has that really long hair and whatever, but she has really long, wild hair. She has a very unkempt look to her. Mm-hmm. But Daisy is perfectly coiffed. Like it looks like she spends every moment that she's not eating chicken or purging
at the hairdresser,
probably at her appearance. And it looks like she's trying to be the perfect homemaker / wife. It's just she has so many issues getting in the way of actually doing that. When she has the apartment and they go on the run and they visit her apartment, she's mistrustful of Lisa, but she's also kind of excited to welcome them in because she gets to actually play the homemaker for a bit. And so that was kind of an interesting bit there. And yes, I do feel for her. I agree with that. And I know, yes, it was a little bit manipulative and a little bit overdramatic to have her kill herself with the end of the world being the song that was playing.
Yeah, that
but
was a
damned
bit
if it isn't memorable.
Yeah, that was
it's
a bit
memorable.
Honestly, I have not heard a usage of that song in a movie. It doesn't matter if it's the original artist or a cover or whatever. I have yet to hear an instance of that song being used where it isn't kind of cringeworthy, because it tends to be really overt. It's a little bit like Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World," how that's always used in like an ironic context, and it's become
not always. I often hear.
I've heard it. Like, I'm thinking of like "Good Morning Vietnam." I'm thinking of "Bowling for Columbine," and it's like
I've seen multiple. I've seen multiple films where "What a Wonderful World" is used both either straight or ironic. It's generally an overused song. It's a great song and it works well on the soundtrack, but it's kind of like, I think that one's like kind of a go-to one for filmmakers. Like, what song can I use? "What a Wonderful World" would fit here.
Yeah, it's too overt and it's too obvious.
Yeah.
Like I would have preferred this is a weird example, but if you remember Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, like that has a great, not just soundtrack in general, but like where the songs get placed. Because some of that comes straight from the book, but others of which are done kind of either in defiance of it or because it would fit the scene better. But like a good example of like an ironic counterpoint that isn't overdone is like, "Yummy, yummy, yummy, I got love in my tummy," and then the very next scene, Benicio del Toro's puking his guts out, and it's like, that's perfect, But like for this, it's like, oh gee, the irony is that it's the end of the world for her, and it's like, haven't we seen that a million times, and isn't that kind of in the context of the song, even if it wasn't in the movie? It's like, I do feel like if they'd have gone, it depends on what they would have wanted. Like they could have gone ironic with like a different song that was also kind of overly upbeat. Like I mean, again, bad example, but like I'm thinking of like, Singing in the Rain, and how that was put to great effect, like Clockwork Orange, even though like lyrically that has nothing to do with what's going on in that scene, nor would it, or something like that wouldn't have had anything lyrically to do with what's going on in this scene. But like if you wanted to do it ironic, you could have done like a different overly happy song, or you could have, I think it might have been more chilling if you could have done something like something that's like fairly innocuous, and maybe the fact that it is kind of like an innocuous song that you might have heard on the radio, maybe that would have made the point without it being overly poetic or like trying to be. Like I'm thinking of like if they'd used like California Dreaming or something like that, just something that you might have heard on the radio and still has that kind of like, it could be sad, it could be happy, it could be neutral depending on how you hear it.
One thing I will say in defense of it, does anyone remember exactly what year this film was supposed to take place in?
1960s.
67 to 68.
Kennedy was...
So
it's whatever year Kennedy was running for election.
Oh, right, yeah, because Martin Luther King, that was 68, right?
Yeah, and Bobby Kennedy was the same year, if I remember.
So in defense of this, we'll just put this out. This song by Skeeter Davis was a huge hit when it came out, and it came out in 1963. And Daisy seems like exactly the sort of individual who would have that old 45 in her collection.
Yeah.
So I think it's entirely appropriate in this context, even if it is a little on the nose. It was thematically appropriate because of the time, because of its popularity. Like if it was like let's say the film was set in the 90s and you had a character with that song playing, it wouldn't jibe as well. It would seem more like you're, oh gee, you couldn't have picked a better song. You know what I mean? Like
if this were set in the 90s, it would have to be like Nothing Compares to You by Sinead O'Connor or something like that.
I could see that actually.
Well, that is one thing I kind of wanted to throw out there. See if this like, if people felt this way or not. So like looking at it, we were talking about hairstyles and what they mean for characters and stuff. So we have established Winona Ryder's short hair. We've established the hairstyle of Brittany Murphy. We've established the unkempt hairstyle of Angelina Jolie. I think that they generally seem to fit the period. I do think the two that seem to kind of transcend it or possibly even skew more '90s would be Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie. Now, granted, short hair and long hair, like those are not really bound by a specific period, but it does seem like they look a little bit less in the period than the people that are around them.
Well,
The
short hair
pixie cut,
around Twiggy in the mid '70s. When I was with Martin Laugh-In. What was that show? Martin Laugh-In. They had that Twiggy girl that had the really short hair, the thin body.
Yeah.
So maybe it wasn't so far away after all.
I think it was coming into style as far as a what was it? More of a defiance look for her, and that's really what Winona Ryder's character is about, is kind of defying the norms and expectations with her parents, which they come in later, and you can tell they want her out because
her parents were really stuffy.
Because they needed to make sure that she was ready to present for their little dinner party.
Yeah.
Did you fix my daughter? I used to have that. As a parent would come in and plop a child down and say, "Okay, I need you to fix this child." Like, hey, I need to get a new carburetor in this thing here, making sure it's running.
Right.
So,
I don't know where I would put a carburetor in that thing. Do you have any ideas?
here's some other. I'm just finding this out just now. So, other choices for this movie might have been Reese Witherspoon, Christina Ricci. I could have seen that. Katie Holmes, Gretchen Mol, Kate Hudson, Alicia Witt, Sarah Polley, and Rose McGowan apparently all auditioned for unspecified roles. And then James Mangold also met with Courtney Love to discuss the role of Lisa, which that would have been interesting, as well as Alanis Morissette for a role. It doesn't say which role. Parker Posey apparently turned down a role, and then Lily Sobieski, who was in Eyes Wide Shut that year, signed on to play Daisy, but dropped out weeks before filming began after receiving an offer to star in Joan of Arc. Now that would have been interesting.
Yeah. That would have been interesting. And I want to say I read that Posey was offered Lisa's role, but I could be wrong. Posey would have been an interesting addition. So would Ricci. So would Sobieski. But like I said, we do have a solid cast as it is.
Yeah, we do. I just brought it up there because I completely agree. I think the cast we have is really good, but I just throwing some other names out there. I was like, geez, my only not so much beef, but like it's like I kind of wish that they could have had all of them in there, because I think that would have been amazing to just put all of them in a room and watch him go. Well, kind of like Ocean's 11, and I guess that's kind of what Ocean's 8 was trying to do. But like, I'm thinking like a more serious, like who's who of actresses of the time.
Right.
Definitely. So, what ends up happening is I know we talked about Daisy moving into the apartment, but in the background we have the other patients actually getting jealous of her actually being the first one to get out of there, because none of them were able to leave, and you see that transpond before it even happens. And of course, we talked about the music, and then of course, Winona Ryder's character Susannah ends up finding Daisy hanging in the bathroom, and that is something that I think that is something that she dealt with, because that's traumatizing.
Well, after we have that scene before that where Lisa was just straight up pushing Daisy's buttons, like making
it would not have.
Absolutely.
I don't think she wouldn't have done it probably if she hadn't been pushed to it, which was the point, I think, at the end. And I think that was a defining moment for Winona Ryder's character, where she's realizing okay, this because beforehand, you notice her character kind of really more not really accepting that there is something wrong going on, and there is something wrong because you know that's not the kind of behaviors that happen when everything is right in the world.
Right.
But she's resistant to it. She's like, "No, I never attempted suicide. I had a headache," and she said it repeatedly throughout. But after this whole, she's like, "No, I attempted suicide,"
Yeah.
and she kind of starts to show, okay, yes, these things did happen. What can I do to get myself better, get myself out of this?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and that definitely is a signal of her character's growth at the time. Which and okay, so did anybody else feel really bad for Jared Leto because he's drafted, first of all.
Right.
He really loves Winona Ryder in spite of everything. He wants to see her before
Right.
he gets shipped off, presumably to his death. Which again, we don't know that. But it was a very
Escape to
real.
Canada.
Well, it's good. It's good to back up a little bit. They had sort of a meet cute at a party where they're both very much attracted to each other, but she turns him off with her morbid outlook on things.
Yeah.
And
Especially with death.
Yeah, that's the moment where like again I am on her side as far as like the legitimacy of her mental health and all that stuff. That is like the one moment where I'm like, okay, that's pushing it a little far. That's a little overly romanticizing something that I'm sure a lot of people struggle with in a very real way. And so there's that, but then it's like I felt bad for him because he loves her and he wants to see her before he either gets shipped off, presumably to his death, or runs away to Canada as an expatriate or whatever. And then she's like, chooses her new friends over him and is like, that I want to get out of here, just not with you. And that's supposed to be like her big moment of, saying that she's starting to take her life into her own hands and all that stuff, I can see that. At the same time, I'm like, well, if I were him, I would have felt, again, cheated. I would have felt, like I was just taken for a ride. And, and what does he have to look forward to? Very little,
I'm not sure that she really took him for a ride. He kind of was pushing from the get-go, but I admit, if you're facing the draft or leaving the country and you really have your hopes set that someone that it will go with you, I did feel for him at that moment, no doubt.
Well, I sympathize with him because I know that I would have felt very cheated and betrayed if I were him, because I'm like, I've been nothing but good to you, and this is how you repay me, and I don't know. I know that I know why she's doing what she's doing, because she's trying to take control of her life somewhat, she goes through that period where she tries to kind of embrace saying I'm a crazy girl, and it's empowering for her at that juncture. And I sympathize with that, but I'm also like, because I've been in his shoes a couple different times, and I know that if I were him, I would have harbored much more of a grudge. But that's just me.
Also, in fairness, this was his second time meeting her, apparently. There was no indication that there was anything more than that. Well, so it was like if it was a long-term relationship and she said something like that, like, nah, I'm good here.
Back then, if you slept with a girl, that meant something. Though.
Well, that's true. That's
in the 60s, you sleep with someone, that's pretty much love.
When he said that he loved her, I mean, now granted, they probably wouldn't have worked out long term, but still, it's like I know how he feels. Perhaps.
And keep in mind what time period we're in too. We're in the late 60s, so it's a time where sleeping with each other is not as emotionally bonding as it used to be. but it's kind of in between because there's a lot of that free love, hippie stuff going on and all that.
Especially since when they were running away, Angelina Jolie's character Lisa and Susannah, they hopped inside a shagadelic van. You know, that 60s van where they just passed the puff pass. You know, so. On their way to Daisy's place.
Kiss each other and they kiss each other, which I was seriously kind of expecting them to, because so in a lot of, I don't know, this comes across as such a trope, or such like me trying to read into things, but I know it's there, and I know that a lot of this kind of like very female centric, either literature or fiction or whatever, that whenever there's like that strong, there's usually like a strong friendship, one of whom is like the bad girl and the other one is the more normal protagonist, and there's usually a deep friendship between the two of them that could possibly tip over into like full-blown lesbianism or at least a flirtation with it. And I've seen that happen quite a few times, not just in fiction, but I know for a lot of women that I've talked to that's part of the appeal. So this clearly taps into something there. I expected them to dive into that much more deeply as a theme, but it's only in the one scene, and it's very kind of, you blink, you miss it, and very much in that kind of 60s free love context. But it's just, I find that an interesting phenomenon, and it's something that does warrant further investigation just because I've seen it pop up a lot of times. But I think partially it's just it shows the differences between the way that a lot of like those strong male friendships, at least the way that they're portrayed in fiction. There's probably plenty of examples that run contrary to it, but generally speaking, with those kinds of like antagonistic friendships with guys, it's usually not portrayed in that way. Except for something like Top Gun, which is like the closest that I can think of to something like this, where like, the relationship that Iceman and Maverick have is like they're like seconds away.
It's a bromance.
Like, it is, but it's like that if it were nowadays, it's like they are seconds away from like kissing each other, right. Seriously. But it's like
it just didn't quite like go Brokeback Mountain.
That kind of
right.
Yeah, not quite, but it's like they still have that kind of homoerotic energy between them, and you saw some of that here, but that wasn't anywhere near as robust of a theme as I've seen in other things like this. So I found that interesting that it's touched upon, but it's nowhere near as pronounced as it has been. And I was kind of glad that it wasn't just for the sake of subtlety, and because otherwise it could have easily gone into like exploitation movie territory.
There was the one character, Cynthia, played by Jillian Armanante, that they gave the strong impression that she was a lesbian and that was probably the reason she was in the asylum in the first place. But again, they didn't dwell on it. She was just kind of there. But I wonder if anyone else disagrees with that reading, but that was the way I read it. That they
is it the one that they like explicitly call a dyke, or
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Which again, it reminds me of the one that we looked at with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where they call him all kinds of.
Oh yeah, they call her Dr. Whip.
But they were very different. They were very different descriptions of. Like, this girl seems reasonably comfortable and confident within context. And again, they don't really Elisa accepted. She picks on everyone. No one really picks on her, but the dude in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, he was kind of the butt of the joke more often than not. And he was severely closeted. He just could not, deal with it. But both of those, I think, were again examples of where at that time they would have been more likely to be shipped away somewhere than than today.
Yeah, and it was just interesting. Like, so they both, a lot of that stuff is because we're told that that's who they are based on the way that the other characters see them. I always felt with the guy from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I always felt with him, like, to me, he struck me as one of the few, like, somewhat rationally minded people there, and like he seemed to be like very sophisticated and everything. Not necessarily the most assertive person, and that could be partially where they're coming from. And that's kind of because I'm usually pretty good about, my gaydar is usually pretty good about that sort of thing. And like for him, like I could have seen it either way. I could have seen it like him actually being very closeted, or I could have seen it to where he's just like a more passive, more intellectual person that that they see as, or that they give him shit for it.
Who just has struggles with the traditional view of masculinity.
Yeah, and you could possibly argue the same for the one person here, although we don't really get nearly as much of an idea of exactly her psychology, I guess.
I did want to mention.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I did want to mention one thing before I forget, that kind of Dane touched on one part and Brandon kind of touched on another. But like you said, Dane, that you thought that Winona Ryder might have been, well, Susannah was overly romanticizing death in that one scene. And then I guess there was kind of pointed out that she kind of turns things around and after seeing Daisy die. And I don't know that it was explicitly stated, but that really, it's worth noting. I know this can be the case, and again, Brandon, you're probably more of an expert on this, but they're like a lot of times people will romanticize things until they actually see them up close, and sometimes that can affect a major mindset change. And so that was kind of, she might have actually been prone to romanticizing death, and I wouldn't think that would be too out of character, but definitely I don't think she would have done it after what she saw.
Well, and that is an important distinction. And so I know that especially when you're younger and you don't really have your priorities are not what they are as you get older, and because you haven't lived as long, obviously, so you don't know what you don't know. But like, in other words, and your emotions are more extreme and that kind of stuff, so you do tend to, when you feel extreme things, you tend to romanticize extreme solutions, partially because, again, when you haven't like faced them head on, then they do seem sort of unreal. And so for her, she's kind of looking at death in that kind of high school student, college student kind of way, versus like, because death does have death has an associated smell to it, and it has decay, it has a lot of things that make it very demonstrably real and pretty disgusting, on top of besides being the end of life. It's like, it's this demonstrably real thing that is not particularly pleasant for those that are around to witness it, let alone the act of going through it. And so I think she does get kind of a cold dose of reality, but also it is just an important distinction that there's the idea of death, and generally speaking, the people when they wish for it, or they flirt with it as an idea, what they're really flirting with is just more the idea of ending their present pain or their present feelings like going nowhere and stuff, which is not really wishing for death in the purest sense. It's more just wanting to be delivered from one's present situation. And I know that because, like, so when I was that age, I would often kind of just in a very fleeting, not serious sense, would think about, death or about not living anymore and that kind of stuff. And I never took any of those things seriously because I knew that it was very fleeting, it was very not serious. And then, when I went through my breakup, a few years ago, like that was the first time that I actually was concerned for my well-being because I was hurting so much, that I really did want it to be over. And that's when it started to become like an actual real temptation. But part of what got me through it was, well, a lot of distraction, a lot of just keeping friends close and that kind of stuff, but also knowing kind of at the heart of it all that what I was really after was an ending of the pain, and that's what you really are seeking at the end of the day. Nobody who wants to die, or I would argue those who actually go through with it, they don't actually really want the act of ceasing to live and the decay and the smell and the all that stuff. They don't want that. They just want an end to their pain. And, so I think
And
she realizes the difference by the end of it.
there's an interesting movie, and some people know of it, some people don't, called Wrist Cutters, which Crow offers an interesting concept of what happens after one attempts suicide or commits. Which there's a part of that that it's a weird irony that it ends up letting them out in a room, in a world more depressing and more bland than the world that they came in from. And it is interesting, a concept as far as that's concerned.
Right.
But yeah, that there's the suicide is that's one of the things I saw with this that's very different. With borderline personality disorder, suicide is usually a gesture. It's usually in the moment, not usually intending to die. Usually, it's intending to get back at somebody or get a response. Whereas major depression, it's usually suicide is to die. You want to die. So, which is an interesting difference. Like if Angelina Jolie's character were trying self harm, it would be more to get a rise out of somebody, not necessarily because she wants to end her own life. Whereas Winona Ryder just wanted out. But again, she had more of a romanticized feeling of death. She'd have been somebody that we'd have considered goth today.
Oh no, I was gonna say
emo.
like, well, it's funny
Yeah.
because Winona Ryder herself was totally of the generation that really popularized goth culture in like the classical sense. So like 80s, 90s, that's when that really came into full being. Well, and she starred in what was possibly the greatest goth movie ever made, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and she kind of it was way up there, that's for sure, and made during made during the time when that sort of thing was in vogue.
Not
So
to
it's
mention that she, at the time, was clearly and heavily associated with Tim Burton
and Johnny Depp.
And Johnny Depp. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So it. Well, yeah. I mean, come on. She was what's her face in Beetlejuice? Yeah. So,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
she was like the ultimate goth girl in that.
Right.
So but, yeah, that is what's kind of funny because and people have kind of given goths a lot of shit over the years because they quite literally and explicitly romanticize death in a kind of, you could argue, attention seeking way. But yeah, that is kind of an amusing connection there. But yeah, she would definitely be considered. I am sure she would gravitate to that subculture today if she were born a few decades later, or were her age a few decades later. But yeah, I mean that is an important distinction there as far as like people that feel suicidal ideation versus those who go through with it, what their motivations are and that kind of stuff, and if they just do harm to themselves, or if it's like a murder suicide situation, or like a mass murder suicide situation. Those are not at all psychologically. Those are not at all the same things. They are motivated by different things. And I mean, I think and again, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, but like I think everybody at some point has felt suicidal ideation to some degree, whether it's very minor or if it's so severe that you actually go through with it. But like all of us have felt, some fleeting, relationship with it. Yeah, the worst that I felt with it for myself was during the breakup, and at that point I had enough of a sense of myself to where it freaked me out enough to where I put a lot of work into making sure that it didn't progress any further. Um, so that I guess that meant that I wasn't too far gone, because I think that if I were too far down the rabbit hole, then it's like it would be harder to get oneself out of it.
And when you look at depression, it's in levels.
Yes.
And same with suicide. You've got basically general thoughts. Then there's actual thoughts of suicide. Then there's planning. And then there's actually attempting. Or actually intent and then attempting. So it's not just there. And depression, people think that the lowest level of depression is suicide. But that's not true. And Winona Ryder shows that in one of the levels, where she hits an extreme low, and she's not even getting out of the bed when Whoopi Goldberg throws her into the tub.
Right.
But that's the idea, is that when you're at the lowest of depression, you might want to die, but you do not even have the motivation. You do not have the care.
Yeah.
You cannot even muster the energy to think about ending it. That is how bad depression gets at the worst level. It's actually at a little bit above the worst level. You're at a little bit higher if you're at the suicidal rate, which is odd.
I was gonna say, like, people often say that suicide is the coward's way out or whatever, but it's like, I think anybody that actually goes through with suicide, I wouldn't necessarily call it cowardice in the sense of like I don't think, I'm not advocating for it or think it's a good thing to do, but it's like it takes a certain level of commitment to actually like succeed in it. So I wouldn't necessarily call that cowardice, in the classical sense. It takes a certain level of, you make a plan and you see it through to the end and you actually achieve your goal. So I don't think that really fits. But it does take a certain type of person that takes extreme behavior and actually goes through with it. So, and it is most certainly extreme behavior. So, I wouldn't exactly call it brave either, but I wouldn't call it cowardice in the classical sense, because cowardice is all about avoidance.
Well, and isn't that what suicide is? It's a sense of a person giving up on life because he or she does not want to face the difficulties of life. So they just kind of put themselves in a corner. They don't want to look out anymore. They get depressed and finally say, I don't want to deal with this life anymore. So they decide to take their lives. Now, some people are not.
Still make that choice. They still decide to get up and do something about it, albeit they make the wrong choice.
Well, they decide to run away from life. The people that face that darkness and comes back from it and then face their fears are the ones that actually have true bravery.
Like that would be what one would hope that they would do. I'm not disagreeing with that whatsoever. It's just what we're trying to distinguish is that there are people like Brandon's saying that that they are in such a state that they aren't really motivated to do anything. They're just kind of there. Just kind of getting through. They can barely breathe. They can barely move. That's how low down they are. Because like suicide, as wrong of a choice as it is in the long run, and as much as it hurts the people who are around to witness it, it is still taking action.
And in this film, you actually have. In this film, you have a couple of other ways of running away depicted in the different characters. Like we touched briefly on Georgina, who they say is a pathological liar. And you see indications that that's part of it. Also, her fascination with the Wizard of Oz is sort of a way of escapism in a sense.
Yeah.
On that, right on the head.
And then the other one, Polly, we haven't even mentioned Polly yet. Polly, apparently, I don't remember exactly what they said the fire was about, but she burned herself severely.
She couldn't have the dog around because she had a rash. So she put gasoline on the rash and lit the match, and she burned herself.
And I can only imagine that the reaction from her family was not pleasant. And between that and the pain and the scarring, she's severely scarred. She has run away from life, and she's kind of locked herself away as almost a child, like a perpetual child.
I was gonna say, like, I think Elizabeth Moss is like the big unsung hero of the piece, and she does
a great job.
Well, and largely because this was pretty early in her career. I think this this would have been first season of The West Wing, if I remember correctly. It was 99.
Maybe.
I think that's right. Because she was the president's daughter on that show, which was an amazing show. When did that premiere? 99. So this.
Oh, she was in Mumford.
Yeah.
Okay.
This would have still been in her. It would have been in her early days.
She apparently goes all the way back to 90, according to IMDb. I didn't realize she'd been around that long.
Yeah, well, but so she was still fairly early on, and this would have been as The West Wing was getting going. This was before Mad Men, before The Handmaid's Tale, before The Invisible Man, before all these things that like were just hit after hit after hit. And after she really kind of came into her own as a dramatic actress, but it's like I feel like she, in many ways, is the unsung hero of this thing, particularly because she's not there looking to soak up the attention in the way that Angelina Jolie is. Well, largely because that's the character. A character is an attention seeker. But like I always have a great admiration for actors that aren't really there being attention whores. They're just there doing the job. And same with like Jeffrey Tambor in this. He's just there doing the job and being that guy. And he does a great job of it. And she is there doing the job and doing she's doing a great job of it. And particularly because she is this mentally like this regressed child, and she has like a very kind of sweet, innocent feel to her, despite the fact that she is so severely burned and has those image issues that she brought upon herself.
Now, you talk about unsung heroes, though. We also have to mention, if y'all look at my little image there, we have not only Polly but the cat.
Yes.
You gotta love the cat. That has to be one of the best behaved cats in any show ever.
She actually accepts the cat from Susannah. She says, "Yeah, I could take care of the kitty." Susannah apparently could not, and I kind of like I was kind of worried about the end of the film because it kind of started leading towards it's always the cat that suffers in these movies. The cat gets tortured. The cat, something happened. I was hoping that this cat, not again. But it turns out the cat is really kind of healing, the healing object in this movie. Because, it was there to comfort Polly. Unfortunately, Polly died. And then, Polly, 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 but the cat was also helped Suzanne and also helped out Polly as well. So
Right.
I was really kind of happy that the cat lived through the movie. I was really concerned about that.
And I wanted to throw out another thought real quick. Dane kind of just briefly mentioned Jeffrey Tambor, and again, whatever his faults, he is a solid actor and he does a good job here. But Dave, I got to admit, I didn't look at Whoopi Goldberg and go, "Damn, she put on the pounds." I looked at Jeffrey Tambor and go, "Was he always that chubby?"
Yes,
He
he was always
was.
that chubby. In fact, there's an episode.
He rarely is nowadays.
There is an episode of Tales from the Crypt, if I remember correctly, where he plays this obese character. And he's always eating these oysters, and he's definitely different. You're talking about Melvin, right?
Yeah.
I
mean, I was probably introduced to him in this movie, but I really was introduced to him from Arrested Development, and he was not as heavy in that series.
He, I mean, whatever, like you said, whatever his faults, I've always really, really loved him as an actor. And based on everything that I heard,
and he's hilarious in Arrested Development.
Oh, I know. He's one of the standouts in that show. I mean, what a great cast. But whatever his faults, which again I don't know, I wasn't there. But from everything I read, it didn't sound like he was beyond, salvation per se.
Right.
It just, to me, it came across like he was just, had the actor's tendency to get too intense on the set, and that it kind of spilled over after action is called, and and again that was, I think, more common in actors of his generation than is necessarily tolerated nowadays. That's kind of how it came across to me. Again, I wasn't there, so I don't know the full details. It didn't sound like it was quite as bad as some of the other stuff that came out around the same time. I still think he's got good work in him. I hope that he's able to do it. But it's just I noticed that. But I look at these these performances of his, like here and in There's Something About Mary, which he had a small role in that. He was the main bad guy in Muppets from Space, stuff like that. And of course, Arrested Development. I'm like, I have always just liked him. I've always felt like he was a solid actor who did the job, was not really there to be a grandstander, but was there to just play the character and did a good job of doing it.
I mean, I liked him in Meet Joe Black, alongside Anthony Hopkins' character there. So I've seen him in multiple acting performances, and I haven't had really a bad word to say against him. So
yeah, which a lot of the people I'm thinking of where they had conflicts with people on the set, and that seems to be the impetus for their quote unquote fall from grace, rather than necessarily sexual abuse or physical abuse or whatever. But if they had conflicts with people on the set, that kind of goes in its own category. And to me, it seems like a less severe thing than if if someone abused other people for years. And at some point, it probably turns into a little bit of a difference in perspective as far as how they felt like they were coming across versus how other people perceived it. And but again, I wasn't there. I don't know the full details, and I'm not going to pretend like I do. But it's it's a little bit like what Ellen is going through now. Part of it is that she kind of set herself by calling oneself, the Be Kind lady or whatever. It's you're kind of setting yourself up for something like that to happen, regardless of how bad it actually was. That being said, she's the boss, so she should have, if she caught the slightest whiff of it, then she should have put the hammer down immediately. And if she didn't catch whiff of it, then why didn't she catch whiff of it? Because the way that stuff generally is structured is that it's, whether you knew and did nothing or should have known. And that seems to be what it is with her. But even so, it's like, to me, it's someone that was like actively physically or sexually abusing people, because we've all had conflicts with people.
Right.
Indeed.
And apparently on this set, from what I understand, Jolie conflicted with a lot of people because the way she portrayed the character, she kind of, from what I understand, she kind of went method with the character, and did that, and it kind of upset some of her co-stars, but yeah.
And I don't. This could just be me. I don't agree with or sympathize with the current kind of backlash against method acting, just because we've seen some truly brilliant work that's resulted from it. And for some people, they can turn it off and turn it on. For other people, like, because if you throw out method acting, then you've got to throw out every Daniel Day-Lewis performance. And do you really want to do that? It's like
one of my favorite Jason Mewes performances is Madness in the Method. I don't know if y'all have seen that one, but where he tried to improve his acting as a character, and ends up finding this book on method acting, ends up killing people because of it. But I always thought that was a fun way of illustrating, especially since it's rare that you actually see a lot of Jason Mewes stuff going around.
That's true. Well, especially independent of Kevin Smith.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, Kevin Smith was in the movie, but he was he was in it more as a friend or as
it wasn't his movie.
Right.
But you know what I mean, though. It's like a lot of that stuff is very subjective in terms of how it's viewed at the time versus now. Because like what's called genius and a great technique then nowadays seems to be viewed as like amateur or as asshole-ish or whatever. And it's like, I think it really is just a difference of style, because and what matters at the end of the day is the quality of the work, because again, if you throw out method acting, then throw out every Marlon Brando performance, throw out every Daniel Day-Lewis performance.
Brando, you could write a book. Actually, I don't know. Did anyone see? I really wanted to see that documentary, Listen to Me, Marlon, but I never did get to. But people, there is so much about the stuff he would pull on set. Apparently, working with him was kind of a nightmare. So it's like
now he whenever people think of method acting in like a bad way, or a good way, people do it for both. They use him both as a good example and a bad example. And especially in the later part of his career,
he's also a bad example of paycheck acting, because when he was doing it for the paycheck,
he would, especially in the latter half of his career, he would like actively test people and put them through their paces and see what they were really made of and that kind of stuff. Which, to a certain extent, I can kind of respect. But on the other hand, it's like, he also got lazy in his methodology, to where he wouldn't even learn his lines and that kind of stuff. And that method or not, that is lazy, and that part I can't support. But like, to me, method is like going all the way. That's putting in far more work than most people would do.
Considering his swan song is a film that most people will never see because the director and writer hates the film.
The big man or whatever.
The Brave, I believe. Was that Marlon? That was Marlon Brando. Right?
No, that wasn't his swan song, but he was in The Brave.
Yeah,
his swan song
could have been one of his last ones.
If I remember correctly, I think his swan song, or his live action, like major starring swan song, I think was The Score, which was a perfectly decent film. It was not terrible, but I read that they. That again, that was pretty much a paycheck role for him, and yeah, he wouldn't remember his lines, and supposedly they had to film him above the waist because he wouldn't wear pants. That was
Which again, I know that to a certain extent he was just fucking with people because he knew
right.
he knew he could.
But of course, in that one, he starred with Edward Norton, who also has a reputation for being prickly and overly method.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I love Birdman so much was that Norton was sending himself up in that movie, and he did it with glee, and I respect that. But we got a little bit of field there, didn't we?
Yes, we did. So I think at this point in time, we should talk about production.
Okay.
What did we think about production?
I actually like the
pretty
setting.
Solid.
Yes, I like the setting of the hospital much better than, actually better than I liked Cuckoo's Nest, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, it really kind of portrayed the mental health system as pretty much all bad for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as I've gotten to look at it, the more I look at it, it's more in shades of gray than it used to be. But
as long as it wasn't 50.
Here you can see a little bit of the bad sections of the mental health system, but at the same time, you can actually tell that yes, this is set up to actually help them.
Yeah.
And in no time were the mental health professionals being necessarily antagonistic towards any of the people there. She was more the antagonist towards. And
yeah, we kind of talked on. Oh, sorry.
They even worked towards helping her get her release, and I think that was so. To me, I think the way they portrayed that is also a great part of the setting because it did portray. Everybody wants to look at the state hospitals when they look at old-fashioned mental health because those are the horror stories. But very few of them look at these other types of hospitals that were the majority of the hospitals back in those days.
Yeah, we didn't really mention Dr. Wick, who's Vanessa Redgrave's character, and she does a fine job with the role. But she does a good job of. She's a hard ass, but she does show some sympathy. She does seem to genuinely want to help. She seems more involved, more what do I want to say, like an active listener than Melvin does in his scenes.
Well, I like that she essentially calls Susannah on her bullshit, but she does it in a way that is not only intelligent but also productive.
Right. Yeah, and then you got Valerie as kind of the head nurse, and is Whoopi Goldberg's character, and she's a bit of a hard ass, but she's sympathetic. She cares about the girls, and it's not like I care a lot type like Ratched. It's more of she genuinely cares, So
and she has a lot of patience.
A lot of patience.
Pikes, I care a lot.
Yeah. No, but yeah, that scene you mentioned, Dane, I was thinking to myself, I was like, Whoopi Goldberg is doing a very good job playing this character in this scene because she's doing a very good job of just barely showing how pissed off she probably is at that moment. But she, there's sort of like that world weary, I have heard this before.
Oh, yeah. You develop a thick skin in mental health.
Yeah.
As I've told people, there's very little on the job you can tell me that'll offend me, and very little you can show me that I haven't seen before. And I've had people physically try to kill me and come back the next day and treat it like nothing happened. And that's the thing. You've got to be able to look at that. If you're going to work in a system like that, you have to develop a thick skin. You've got to be willing to just understand that when people say these things, they're not necessarily. It's not necessarily them doing it. It's a lot of it is the illness related, and separate it so that you can, because you've got to look at it. It's not about you. It's not about your sensibilities. They can go around and say seek Heil all they want, but this isn't about my sentimentality or sensibilities. It's about helping them, and I think that's a good illustration. Like she said, she thinks it bothers me, but she's probably got such a thick skin at this point. It's like, no, not really.
Right. Yeah. Now, on Dave, on your talking about the production, it is worth noting that this one also, like Cuckoo's Nest, was partially filmed at an actual hospital, which was in use at the time, but it's closed down since then. So that's kind of an interesting theme we keep coming across. But it makes sense. It's a lot cheaper than building a set. But
oh yeah. I think that this definitely gave a look at the inside of a hospital at that point in time, and I think it was relative to reality of its setting. So, did anyone else have anything else to add
as far as production and such?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, as a period piece, they do a good job with most of the production, the costumes, the hair. They really do a good job of setting the time and the place. And
I love the subtlety too, because
right.
At first you don't necessarily look at it, but then you walk out. When they walk out of that doctor's office, one of the first things that you see is that big Kennedy for election sign, and that places it right there, and that's really cool how they do that.
Okay. I guess, and we talked about the music earlier, so I think that's already been kind of talked about. So why don't we talk about our favorite scenes? Roger, we haven't heard from you in a while. Why don't you tell us what would have been your favorite scene throughout this entire film? Okay.
Are you with us, Roger?
Alrighty.
Again at the end.
Going over to Jake. Why don't you tell us your favorite scene, if you could take one?
If I had to pick favorite scenes, I'm not sure there are any clear winners, but one that I enjoyed a lot was the late night kind of exploring the bowels of the hospital scene, where the bowling and especially when they're sitting around comparing notes on each other. I did like that scene a lot. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I have to admit, even though I know that it's probably one of the scenes that a lot of the people said was too cloying, too on the nose. I know the author herself downplayed this scene as, I think she called it melodramatic drivel. But that whole scene at Daisy's, that just stuck with me. The whole, the whole next morning scene in particular, but also the night before where Lisa's just sitting there pushing her buttons right and left, and the acting on both parts, Jolie and Murphy, just again, I just gotta say the cruel irony that Murphy died so young and was the one to kill herself in the movie. It's just, but both of them do such a great job with their roles. That scene really sticks with me. So, yeah, I don't know if it's a favorite, but it's notable.
Okay. I don't know why. I'm going to do mine right now. Mine is the whole Daisy death scene. That whole leading up to the the whole truthing with Lisa pushing of the buttons, and I don't know why that whole scene is just very odd out of the whole thing, and I love the cat.
Oh yeah, the cat's the star of the movie.
Any case, Dane, why don't you tell us what would have been your favorite scene of this particular feature?
I mean, again, this isn't, for me anyway, this isn't really a movie with a whole lot of like really humongously memorable standout scenes, even though we've touched on a few of them, but like I think the one that strikes me is talking about the meaning of ambivalent, because she wants to Winona Ryder wants to make the point that she doesn't care about life or about anything, and so she wants to make the point that that's her new favorite word, but then actually analyzing the meaning of the word from its Greek and Latin roots, in fact, means that she's torn, between very strong feelings, and I have a deep love for philology and for the meaning of words in general, and it's such that it's an important thing to know the meaning of words, but also just to really think about the connotations of words and what they can reveal about a person's personality, even if they don't consciously realize it. And so, in fact, by diving deeper into it, she reveals Vanessa Redgrave reveals quite a lot about our protagonist's psyche that she wasn't consciously aware of. But it makes a lot of sense because she's trying to play it off like she doesn't care about anything, but in fact she does care deeply about her life, but she's just being pulled in multiple directions. So that's a great skill to have, being able to dive deep into language as a way to reveal character.
All right. Hey, Roger. Did you want to tell us what maybe your favorite scene might have been?
Oh, that's easy. It was when the cat was hugged.
There you go.
Yeah, that was the one piece of glowing in the dark feeling, flowers everywhere. It's like, oh, the cat made it. It's being loved, and it's great. That was easy.
and as she walks away, you'll hear Polly going, "I'm going to love you and squeeze you forever and ever."
Well loved and taken care of.
And then before you know it, that cat turns into the cat from Pet Sematary.
Or the Cheshire Cat. Anyways, going over to Brandon, why don't you tell us what would have been your favorite scene from this particular film?
To me, I actually take, I don't know why it sticks out in my mind. There's two, really. The one is when she's with the guy and they're just kind of doing this, and she's kind of going on about death, and he's saying, I don't want to talk about that. And at first, I like how it goes in there, and she's automatically thinks like crude or whatnot, just how he is. And then he brings up Vietnam, which is even more of a good reason why I don't want to think about death because of this. The other, though, is the ice cream scene. I don't know what it is about that one, but it's just it's funny, especially when she's sitting there and they're trying to basically confront her on it, especially with her sleeping with the woman's husband. And then as they're getting there, and then of course they come to her defense and start barking at her and all that stuff. That was
right.
Alrighty. And I think that brings us to an end here. So why don't we start with you, Roger, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, my name is Roger. I live in Florida, and I also want to have the largest anime collection in Florida, including the imports. I also happen to run Animation Collections Company. It's a place where It specializes in wide-scale collecting of anime, manga, and figures. If anybody wanted to join and they have the right chops, they'll be able to come on in.
Alrighty. Heading over to Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm Dane Kyle. I'm an independent filmmaker out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been working on a new YouTube series called Oztober, where I review a different Oz-related piece of film or television throughout the month of October, hopefully to try to inspire the next generation of filmmakers to use the public domain properties of the Oz books as a way to hopefully tell a story that's meaningful to them, which is what I've been trying to do myself, and that's why I dived into those stories very in depth, and so hopefully people will join the journey along with me. And I'm gonna be putting together a new YouTube channel for it as well.
Alrighty. Heading over to Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
SeptumSin of SeptumSin versus the World. We love physical media here, do pickup videos. We do our weekly release updates so that you can keep up and informed about what's coming out on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. Of course, we don't always do that. We do reviews. I finally finished my Ghost of Tsushima review, which will be up Friday. And we are running our awards, the Versus Awards. And this year, our site is going to be the first one to host. I'm hoping that as we go on, more people are going to be interested in taking on the work to host the awards. So it's going to be SeptumSin versus the awards, which will change, like I say, as we go on. And we have finished our summaries. So if you want to sit for a long time, you haven't seen the films, but you want to vote, you can take about 4 hours. And we go over every single nominated film. Mm-hmm. And Dave, Jake, and I did a vlogcast this week that also does a kind of a brief overview of what's going on and gives our views of it. But if you want to participate, get a hold of one of us, and we will get you a ballot, because this Friday is the deadline for voting. So you want to show your views as to what you think should win. You should check it out. Of course, we also do work with Inside Movies Galore. We're going to continue our Asylum month by hitting a wonderful film called A Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe.
Yeah, that's a real good one. It's probably the highest end one I've seen yet.
Yep, very and an Oscar-winning film as well, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we're going to show is we've got our theme for September, which is going to be Accidentally Scary, which we're collecting the movies now to find out which ones will get in, but it'll be about films that aren't necessarily meant to be scary, but they have a part that's unintentionally creepy, or just a setting that becomes unintentionally creepy. I think two of the ones that inspired that for me were Return to Oz and Alice, Said the White Rabbit.
Yes, Said the White Rabbit.
All right. Oh, that's it for me.
Okay. Should I go?
Yep, go.
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Kotobukijake. I am the co-host on SeptumSin versus the World. Also, big time fan of movie, anime, manga, comics, books, you name it. Media, I collect it. I enjoy it. Uh, and as he said, we have a lot of fun videos out there revolving around the upcoming awards. We have started receiving a few ballots, and it's off to an interesting start. But we'll certainly be happy to receive quite a few more. Hopefully, quite a few more. We're hoping for lots of participation. It'd be great, be fun. And that's pretty much all I've got going this week, I guess. Yeah. You did plug the upcoming 200th, I'm sure.
No, I didn't. But go ahead. Definitely.
Okay. So we got
there's so much big going on.
I know. We got our 200th pickup episode also coming up soon. So that's pretty cool. And hopefully y'all have been enjoying those all along. But certainly tune in. We've got a nice, big, star-studded video.
Our friends are all joining us to help us celebrate, including individuals like Roger and Dave and Dane and maybe Mo and all those people.
Yes. So,
alrighty,
good times.
And my name is David Streggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this amazing journey. We are almost out of the asylum, but they haven't quite checked us out. So stay tuned for more next week. And but I'm also moonlight under a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I go on about my own video pickups and my own video reviews. And I've actually got two to three pickups out there. So check out some of the new stuff that I have to share with you that I have within my collection. And I'm still working on getting back to reviews, but that's okay. It'll come. But in any case, like, share, and subscribe. And hopefully you have had a wonderful time with us. Thank you and enjoy.
Yeah.